Hey everybody, welcome back to Leosophy. This is sort of like an impromptu Halloween special, and I got 3 Halloween themed questions. So let's start. The first one is, what is the origin of Halloween? A pretty broad one. I think that's because of the podcast, because we're going to have a Halloween special. Anyway, and we're going to go more in depth on that, so just check out the 13th floor episode. I'll actually link it below when it airs. It probably will air actually on Halloween itself. So it'll air after this episode airs, but I'll go into it. So Samhain, or Samhain, is the Celtic festival that sort of is the precursor to modern Halloween. And it was believed to be sort of a day in which the veil between different realms or planes of existence got thinner, which included the veil between this world and the hereafter, where the dead go. And as such, it was a day wherein people that you were close to in life might come and visit you, post-mortem. So, and you see this in other holidays. That's another thing we'll cover for the podcast, is like in Japan they've got Obon, there's El Dia de los Muertos in Mexico. A lot of pagan views reflect this notion that there are times where the barriers between the living and the dead become weakened. And in the case of Samhain, the reason for this is it's sort of a midpoint between solar cycles, where the hours of daylight and of darkness are sort of, they're reaching a point where it's now half and half, and then of course it just continues to shed until you get to the winter festival, like Saturnalia or Christmas or whatever. Different cultures have different winter festivals. And by the way, Saturnalia is vastly different from Christmas, and Christmas is not a ripoff of Saturnalia. That is a common myth. If anything, the Roman winter festivals that happened in December are actually an attempt to garner people back from Christianity. So it's not this ripoff that a lot of people think that it is. But incidentally, I'm getting ahead of myself. But Samhain is a Celtic festival. I'll go more in depth on it for the actual podcast. It'll be more interesting in that sense, because it's just easier to record a lot more information as an audio recording rather than as a video one, just the way it is, sorry. But a lot of those traditions, they began as Celtic traditions. For example, jack-o'-lanterns. When I was a kid, I laughed at this. I thought it was silly that they used turnips originally instead of pumpkins. Pumpkin is a New World crop. It's something that actually Irish immigrants to the U.S. began to use because, it was more common and easier to use, and now it's become this iconic image. But what's interesting is, if you actually look at old turnip jack-o'-lanterns, they are way scarier than the pumpkin ones. The pumpkin ones are like kid-friendly jack-o'-lanterns. Those turnip ones look like shrunken heads. They are mortifying. But ultimately, it's about appeasing and honoring the dead. And where I was going with this actually relates to question 2. Question 2 is, in one of your episodes, you talk about the concept of liminal. What does it mean? I waited to answer that one for this episode because it's perfect for this. Because that liminal means something is between categories. It's not in, it's not out. It's two things. And in nature, and as such, as part of the human zeitgeist, as part of human cultural consciousness, things that are not one thing or another are tended to frighten or disgust us. It's it goes back to that whole quote. What is that? You are neither hot nor cold, but lukewarm, and I'll spew you from my mouth. That's something you see across the board. We don't like nature, as I've mentioned in previous biology episodes. Nature abhors a hybrid. Well, we don't like things that are not well defined. We're uncomfortable with things that are not well defined, and that's why so many of the monsters in all across global mythology tends to not be like a unique thing. It's not the lack of imagination of storytellers. It's the fact that we're genuinely frightened when something is half and half. So, sphinxes, minotaurs, centaurs, what's that one? Griffins, just any kind of the Kynocephalus, any kind of animal that has traits of one creature and traits of another, especially a human, that frightens us. You even see it now. Like if you look at a lot of modern horror and science fiction stories, what makes them frightening is that somebody's half something and half not. Even movies that don't actually have traditional monsters do this. Freddy Krueger, he's half person, half dream. He exists in reality, but he also exists within people's subconscious, within their dreams. That's what liminal means. It means not fully ingrained in a single category. And it lines up perfectly with Samhain because it's the same thing. It's not autumn, it's not winter, it's not, I'm talking about in the traditional Celtic view. It's a liminal period. It's a period where things are there's still green foliage, but there's also dead brown foliage. It's a transitory period, and transitory periods are always uncomfortable for people, and that's why it has such a bearing on human consciousness. It's the same reason why the Mexicans celebrate El Dia de los Muertos. It's the same reason why the Japanese celebrate Obon. Liminal periods that are not one thing or another, tend to make us naturally fearful and uncomfortable, and so we create rituals to both assuage those fears as well as to give credence to why we feel that way to begin with. And that's what I think is important about the concept of liminality. And you see this even in other cultures, like for the Norse, the berserkers, the bear shirts. Part of why they were so fearsome was because they adopted qualities or attributes, at least psychologically, after taking what some people think were amanita mushrooms, and I tend to agree, traits of animals. They were not fully human when they entered that state, and that's why they were so fearsome. Again, liminality, the idea of something. Stephen King calls it slippage. Where borders are, things tend to fester and go bad. Well, it's kind of funny given his politics that really that view, I think, has a lot of truth to it. The idea of the degradation of things whenever they're on borders between two different states, it tends to be inevitable. So that's why we fear liminality. That's why we incorporate it into our horror stories rather than our positive stories. And of course, in the modern era, you do see things like that. A lot of superheroes and things like that, they're not fully human, or they incorporate elements of something else, some kind of otherworldly presence. You could even argue, and this is really getting a little bit soft-boiled here, but you could even argue that possession movies are liminal, because what's scary about it, if you just made a movie about like a demon that had a corporeal body, it wouldn't be as scary. But because it's a person who's not really fully a person, their consciousness has been supplanted by something else, and so they're two things in one. That's what makes it more uncomfortable, in addition to the fact that I think it kind of caters to just the natural fear we have of like parasitism or a lack of control, So, yeah, there's a lot that can be analyzed with this, but the thing to take home here is that Halloween has its origins in the Celtic festival of Samhain, and liminal is something that adopts two states at once, so it's not perfectly one thing or another. Yeah, that's, let me see, I think I have a third one. Let me look it up real quick. Sure enough, I did. Really glad that I looked that up. Didn't want to leave anybody out. Why are so many countries now celebrating this American holiday? And that's a really fun question, because we just got done ranting about how it's not. But interestingly enough, it began as an Irish festival, and it became more American as Irish immigrants moved to America and really just kind of went full throttle with it, and simultaneously because of a lot of just crackdowns on pagan beliefs in general, the Irish sort of, it waned. It became more affiliated with All Saints' Day, which was an attempt to actually prevent the pagan practices. And from there, it just became more formal. It became more about attending church on November 1st, and over time, it just sort of waned. Well, because of the hardcore commercialization of American culture, again, if you give us something, we'll turn it into a million ways to make money off of it, often at the expense of its character or soul. And I know that's debatable, and I get it, but a lot of things we do celebrate have become just kind of all about chocolate. Everything. Easter, Halloween. I'm surprised 4th of July hasn't become more chocolate associated. Really, it's probably just because it's too hot. But anyway, sorry. Going on a tangent. Anyway, bottom line, it became very popular in the United States. It just continued to skyrocket in popularity. Middle of the 20th century is where it just absolutely took off. And because of the film industry and because of the Americanization of a lot of countries due to our business practices and our media sort of just taking the world by storm, a lot of other countries began to adopt it. And so now you're starting to see it back in Ireland. Now you're seeing it in Britain. And the flippin' Japanese, they have really taken a shining to it. They love Halloween. So, So it's really interesting to see that the way it's evolved over the years. But I heartily recommend that you look into the origins for yourself, because there is a lot more that can be gleaned out of it than I could ever illuminate in like an 11-minute period. Anyway, that's all for me. Like, share, subscribe, keep asking questions. Bye.